And our guest for today's episode of Titans of Today is Megan Hunter. She's the co-founder and CEO of the High Conflict Institute, or HCI. HCI is the industry-leading training and consulting organization in high conflict disputes and high conflict people. A lot we can talk about on that topic. So on top of that, she is also the founder and publisher of Unhooked Books, where her and her team publish and sell books on difficult relationships, high conflict divorce, parental alienation, workplace conflict, parenting, co-parenting, wellness, and many other self-help and professional books. Megan, welcome.
Thank you. It's definitely my true pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So the burning question that I think everyone needs to understand and know right away is, what has you obsessed with conflict management and conflict resolution?
A long journey, but it just didn't make sense to me that people would come to either government organizations or mediators and couldn't resolve conflict. It just seemed like there was a real gap in the system. And I guess I'm a status quo breaker. If something's broken, let's fix it. Why do we have to do things the old way? So I got pretty obsessed with it maybe 20 years ago, as I started as a child support caseworker. And I just wanted people to come to agreement on something as simple as child support, which I know is complex. It's not that simple, but there were ways that it could be done. And I saw so many people failing at bringing people to agreement. So I got obsessed.
Absolutely. And so to go back to that work history, you were in child support and family law for 11 years. What have they changed since? Did you learn during that?
There was a particular mom in a child support case that anytime she came, literally just wanted to jump across the table and choke her. She was blaming, I don't know, it just really got under my skin. And I didn't understand it at that time. I was pretty young, new in my career. And I had a little experience before that working at the Solid Waste Agency of Northwest Nebraska, which is also known as the dump. Thank you. Yeah, isn't that funny? Dump to the Swan. But I started my career at Swan right when they opened, and it was when the state had just passed legislation that all the farmers needed to dump their garbage in town instead of dumping it on their property, like in a canyon or something like that. So not only did they get to bring their garbage to town now, they also got to pay for it. And so I started my first job out of college there, answering the phone with about 5,000 farmers and ranchers calling saying, I didn't know about this and why is this happening? So I think that's really, when I think about it, truly that's where my obsession with conflict started, or at least my education about what people are like, who's really able to control themselves and to handle things somewhat amicably, even if there are disagreements. I learned a lot about when to just shut up, when to just listen, when it was okay to hang up the phone, things like that. So then I went from there into child support. And like I said, there was that one woman who just really got under my skin, and I didn't understand that. Why, of all the people? And it took a few years to really figure that out. But truly where I started understanding conflict was in wanting to help dads, because in child support, at least back in those days, we did a lot for the child, we did a lot for the mom, but we would order the dads to pay child support, but we couldn't talk to them about visiting their child or custody or anything like that. It just wasn't our role. And so I thought, well, if I get trained in mediation, maybe I can help the dads a little bit outside of my job. So I went and got some mediation training and then more family mediation training. And shortly after that, I didn't even get to use it, but I moved to Arizona from Nebraska and became the child support specialist for the Arizona Supreme Court. And it turns out it was all legislation and policy and judicial training. I wasn't really working with parents directly, but I was working on behalf of them on a statewide basis. That's where I really fell in love with helping people, I think, and with conflict. So after doing child support legislation and child support guidelines, things like that for a while, I started to see what was happening in the family law world, meaning divorce and custody cases. And there was this common thread amongst the family law professionals, meaning the judges, the mediators, the lawyers, the parenting coordinators, really huge industry actually, but one common thread, and it was called high conflict cases. And it made no sense to me that 10 to 15% of all family law cases took 80 to 90% of the court's time and resources and provided the most frustration and just kept coming back to court. So that's how I ended up in the high conflict arena.
Amazing. A lot to unpack there. And I want to kind of park the thought about you said about the statewide level. And I want to first personalize it for everybody who's will be listening to this. Do the principles that you apply to get the results for your clients and that you've learned over your journey to here now apply to everyday people and relationships? And what are some of those core principles?
Yeah, they do, because it doesn't matter if you're in a high conflict divorce or a high conflict neighbor dispute or anything, anywhere in life. What our company really focuses on, our real core, is what we call someone with a high conflict personality. And there's four key characteristics. They are blamers. They like instantly blame. They always take the victim role. They're very all or nothing in their thinking instead of flexible, where most of us can be flexible and think through options. They're just all or nothing. It's all your fault and you need to fix it. And then unmanaged emotions. They're really out of control, whether that be manipulating or just complete outbursts and crying a lot, just unmanaged. And then the last one is extreme behaviors. And these are folks who just don't stop themselves. So, like them who maybe 10 to 15% of folks in our sphere do things that 90% of other people would never do, right? So they keep repeating these four patterns of behavior over and over again, and it's just their operating system. These are the rules of their operating system, and they're very opposite of everyone else's. So the issue comes then, we don't know that they have a different operating system, so we keep applying the same principles and strategies with them that we do with everyone else, and they backfire.
And I've heard of this before. To jump into more on that, here at Google, they have a policy or a framework. They very much so acknowledge that these people exist. I believe they call them divas or prima donnas or something. And they make sure to hire those people, but you have to manage them appropriately. You have to know, like you said, they have a different operating system. So what more light can you shed on that? And maybe I could be totally wrong. And it's just what I heard from a video on Google.
That's really fascinating because a lot of companies don't want someone with a high conflict personality in the workplace. And of course, there are always going to be people like that in the workplace. And you do have to know how to manage them because you have to manage them very differently. Intentionally hiring them, that would be interesting because if you have someone that really has no insight, and that's one of the key factors here, is these are people who don't have insight into their own behaviors. They don't know they have a high conflict personality. They don't know that they just don't have that insight. And they truly believe that someone outside of them is causing problems for them. And so that's where the victim role comes from, and that's where the blame comes from. And they're typically bringing problems to their supervisors instead of solutions. And it's really easy for them to complain and blame instead of problem solve.
So there's levels, there's a spectrum. And so your objective then is on that far side of the spectrum where there is the non-awareness or non-insight. Come in and help those people improve. And what else do you see when you get down there and you're working with companies and people? What are the sort of moments that they come through and they have the realization or they're able to see clearer?
Then they wouldn't probably be a true high conflict personality.
My apology there is when you do come through with them, like you take someone from a problem state to maybe a state of awareness.
For some, if they're on the lower end of that extreme spectrum, right? So we have difficult people, and then we have some that are more extreme. And those at the very most extreme end are the high conflict personality. They're typically not going to get that insight. So if someone is going to get the insight, they're going to be more in the mid range, I would say. And it will come through some coaching, right? On how to have flexible thinking, how to manage your emotions, how to have moderate behaviors, how to take responsibility, that kind of thing. And so I've worked with a lot of people who a company thought this individual was a high conflict personality, and it's just always a problem. Their emails were they were just constantly needling other people and just disrupting. And after coaching them a little bit and going down some leadership paths with them as well, teaching them a few skills, they were able to turn it around and get that insight. And then they can become a very productive player in the company. But there are others that I'll work with, and you do the same type of coaching, teaching the same type of skills, and they just don't get it. They may get it in very small, slow steps, but it's pretty tough.
So back to the concept of burning desire, the obsession with getting conflict resolved. Most people are obsessed with the total opposite, and it's unconscious. They don't even notice it. They're avoiding conflict. So let's talk about avoidant behaviors and what maybe people can do to become more aware.
Yeah, I'm married to a conflict avoider. So I run conflict and he runs away from it. But most people don't like conflict in the workplace, in any organization. It's a time waster. Conflict is not entirely avoidable. It's going to happen, but it's really how you manage it. So what do people do to avoid? It goes back to fight, flight, or freeze for many people, and particularly with the high conflict person, because there's a lot going on between the brains. I think of it almost Wi-Fi, and you're picking up emotions from the other person and you get emotionally hooked and go into your natural state, which might be to avoid or to fight. I'm more of a sort of a fighter explainer, where my husband would be more of an avoider. He'd like to just dissipate into thin air. With high conflict situations, you have to do the opposite of what you feel like doing. So I may feel like explaining, but it's not going to work with them. So a lot of people, I think, if you've been around someone that gives you that really strong emotion or that knot in your gut and it comes up through your chest and your neck and your face and you just feel that and it's a really strong emotion, you're probably dealing with someone kind of high conflict. And then it's up to you on what you're going to do, because most people are going to want to avoid that person, but you have to do something a little bit different so you could communicate with them. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's more philosophical. If someone wants to overcome those avoidant behaviors, and because what I've experienced perhaps in the past is if you avoid one thing, you're going to avoid other things, and maybe it's even taking good actions. So are there things that people can do to, hey, I want to do this, but rather than avoiding it, maybe they know they need to, they should, it fits all those good categories, but they don't do it.
Yeah. If you're around someone like this and you have to work with them, they work for you, they're on your team, they're your business partner, whatever, you have to manage the relationship, because the high conflict person will manage you if you don't turn it around, right? Because they're often engage in manipulative behaviors. They may lie. They're driven by fear, and their default, like all of us, feeling safe. And for them in relationships, when they're just with other people, that's when their fears get triggered. So for someone with a narcissistic personality, their fear of feeling inferior will get triggered when someone else gets attention. So they want to get back to where they feel safe, so they'll put you down, they'll diss you, that kind of thing. And there are a few different fear types. But if we think of it in those terms, and we then stand up and learn the skills to turn things around with them, which means you have to use a little bit different type of language. We call it using ear statements, which is empathy, attention, and respect. You have someone really emoting at you or blaming you for something or just being a jerk, right? Instead of arguing with them or defending yourself, you give them a little ear, which I know sounds a little bit dorky, but it really works because that's what their right brain is craving: empathy, attention, respect. So if you have somebody really narcissistic, they're craving respect. So you give them a little respect. Hey, I respect what you did there. It just calms them right down, and then you can get some work done. So it's the talking, it's writing. We have a method we call BIF, B-I-F, to take out all of the junk from emails or DMs or anything that's in writing that would escalate the conflict. And instead, it will then de-escalate it and stop all the back and forth, which, as we all know, is the huge time waster in organizations. I've seen one email, very simple email, cost 12 hours of time for managers, supervisors, consultants, everyone.
Now, you said something really phenomenally interesting, and a lot we can go deeper on: ear statements and how the right brain is what's craving that. So how has the manner in which the brain has developed over however long really started to influence and continues to influence our behaviors, the way we feel, our sense of security, and things of that nature?
Yeah, and I have to say right off the bat, I'm not a neuroscientist, but everything we do in our company is based on current neuro research. People argue over which part of the brain is it up, down, top, bottom, whatever. It doesn't matter. It's a matter of fear and safety. And when someone's feeling fear, you give them a little ear to get them calm so they can get back into the logic part of their brain where they feel safe and they can problem solve. And you have to guide them along into that as well. There's lots of things going on. Some people are going to be hypersensitive to tone of voice, and they may hear a tone of voice that triggers them into that fight or flight mode, into that fear mode. And it may be real or it may not be. It may be just how their brain's perceiving it. But all of a sudden they're upset and they're blaming, and you have no idea what's going on. It's pretty basic to me. It's fear, safety. When people are upset, calm them. Don't tell them to calm down, but give them a little ear and then help them get shoved into problem solving. Because if you have a lot of flow going back and forth between the hemispheres, you're going to make better decisions. And that's really the key. I hope that
And
answers
the
your
ear
question.
no, what was that?
I hope that answered your question.
No, it's great. So the ear statement is empathy, appreciation, respect.
Empathy, attention, respect.
Attention, respect.
Yeah, so that right brain is really craving those three things: empathy, attention, and respect. And you don't have to know which one to use, you just have to use one. So an ear statement might be something like, oh, tell me more. Oh, that sounds frustrating. Oh, that sounds hard. And then I usually follow it up with a question, because the ear statement calms them. And then you can follow it up with a question like, let's talk about some options here. What have you tried? Because they're so used to thinking in terms of all or nothing, especially when they're upset, that they're not thinking in terms of options. And so you have to lead them down that path.
So where does all conflict begin? Does it have an origin within the personality of an individual and how they're influenced throughout their life that expresses externally, or does it have a collective origin expressed through the individual?
Where we come from is this high conflict personality. It's been growing over a lifetime, right? The longer we're in the business, the more we truly have come to understand and purport that a lot of it is genetics. It's impulse control, genetics, and some other things, right? If those are present, and then you add to those experiences growing up, whether it's attachment issues on those first few years of life, attachment to a primary caregiver, or trauma, childhood trauma can really impact personality development. Not in everyone, but in some. And then just larger cultural influences and role modeling of adults in their lives and on television and things and schools. And it all can impact that. So most people get through life pretty okay, right? I would say let's just throw out 80%. And then let's say 10% kind of crunchy, and then maybe another 10%. And these are very rough numbers, but there is a small portion of the population who really do have this high conflict personality, and it may be grounded in a personality disorder. It may not be, but we find that there's something called the cluster B personality disorders, and they seem to have this pattern of behavior, not all of them, but some of them, of those four key characteristics.
And to restate those four key characteristics, that way everybody can imprint it in their minds again.
Yeah, so it's all or nothing thinking, unmanaged emotions, extreme behaviors, and blame. And I think probably the thing to remember is blame. There are people who blame a lot, and when you call them out on it, if you do, which I don't advise, but if you do, they're going to make a lot of excuses for their bad behavior. And that's when you know what you're dealing with, that person who really can't see their role in a problem. And that really is the bright line. If there's two people in a conflict in your organization and you talk to them individually and one of them says, oh, I get it, I screwed up or whatever, and the other one's, nope, it's all his fault, right? They don't see their role. That's when you have an issue. That's when you probably have someone with a high conflict personality.
So to focus on the positive side of things, what are the symptoms of a successful workplace culture?
I think a workplace that puts an emphasis on both job performance and on people skills is going to be probably an optimal company, and they're going to have competitive advantage over others in their industry, because I think we've focused for so long on job performance and let's just get people skilled up and get the best employees. But you really, especially in today's day and age, have to look at people that can also get along with others, people who can be moderate instead of extreme. You want someone who can be extreme maybe in their job performance, like a real go-getter, but if they're causing so much problem either in their team or in the organization in how they deal with others, it can really, I've seen companies just get completely sabotaged over just one high conflict person that had some power. There's a long history of self-sabotage with high conflict people, and so they can really tear it down. So I think back to the positive side of this is, yeah, you want somebody who can do their job really well and get along with people very well, and make sure it's not in a manipulative way, but they really can get along with people.
And then what are the principles of that pleasing personality of someone who does get along with people very well?
I think it's being able to stop yourself and think before reacting to people. It's someone who can see themselves as a leader no matter what role in the company they're in. And I think this is really important, and a lot of people miss this, is that we're all leaders, whether you're at the lowest levels of an organization or at the top. You need to lead wherever you are. And lead doesn't mean bossing other people around, but lead means doing your absolute best at your job, seeing yourself as someone who's capable and qualified to be in that job, and can, be part of a team and be a problem solver, team player. I truly think that's a huge part of it.
And then what are those strategies when you're coming in to address the rest of the team? Is that also part of it? Some exercises or workshops or habits or techniques for the rest of the organization to really rise up together?
Yeah, I think I can only speak for some of the companies we've worked with that really had some culture problems, and they develop over time and they get ugly. And what we have come in and done is taught some very basic skills, the ones I already talked about, ear and biff, right? So it's talking and writing. And those are designed to create a civil, courteous workplace, right? Making these as a matter of policy. So our communication policy is that we speak to each other with ear, with empathy, attention, and respect. And we write to each other, whether it's a text message or an email, with BIF, brief, informative, friendly, and firm, because it just takes out any potential conflict and it takes out a lot of misunderstandings. So taking a few seconds to have those principles in place every time you send an email, that type of thing, it completely changes the workplace culture, and it makes leaders out of people. It's also an accountability feature. If someone's sending off nasty emails, then if that's against policy, if you have a policy that you're going to use BIF for your emails and someone's sending off these manipulative, blaming, hostile emails, then you have some record there to go in and say, okay, we need to change this. And if you can't change it, then we'll have to make other decisions.
So it becomes a clear framework of operation.
Right. I think every company should have this built into their policies, honestly. It's a game changer.
And from a scientific perspective, when you're coming in and implementing these strategies, how else are you improving, or what are some of the metrics perhaps that you're seeing improvements in for the companies, individuals, and the relationships?
I think we all like to feel safe. And if we feel out of control when there's not a good standard, right? And there's not accountability. So just by having policies like these in place and following through is super important, right? We all feel safer. And when we feel safer, we have a more ability to think and focus on our objectives and what we're supposed to be doing. I really do think that's a big part of it. And what I've seen with some companies is that they're so focused on their everyday duties and the bottom line that they forget about some of these things. What are we doing here? Why are we here? What are we working on together? So I've worked with some companies on a mission statement. And some companies, I'll ask them, do you have a mission statement? Of course we do. Anybody know what it is? No, let me look it up on the website. I'm not making fun of anybody. It's just really normal because they're so busy, right? So they'll go and they'll read it, and it's 1 or 2 sentences long. Other companies will say, no, we've never had one. 60 years, we just haven't had one. You want to have one? Sure, we do. So I take them through an exercise of here's who we are, here's what we do, here's how we do it, and here's my role in it. And everything that you do is tied to that one mission statement. And you keep bringing people back to that. So it keeps them hyper focused on why they're there. I think that is probably one of the biggest I've seen in companies for kind of long term, and they have to remember to go back to it. But it brings them together. And part of the reason it does is because people from teams or from the whole company, depending on the size, are learning to make joint decisions together. And this is really, really important, a facet of conflict.
So go more in detail on that, making decisions together. How does that influence maybe an organizational chart or a functional chart is what I've heard. Alan Witters, that was our first episode. He mentioned this and it actually gave me, it was an insight to me I've never heard of before about there's an organizational chart, but then there's how the company actually functions, who's
Hmm.
communicating to who and how. So yeah, more on how people can make decisions and organizations can make decisions together more effectively.
Takes effort. It takes effort. It's a constant challenge to have the communication going and get everyone on the same page or having the same understandings and communicating with each other. So it can be really tough for me. It's having regularly scheduled meetings so I can get people talking and having an activity like a mission statement for every project, even if it's small. Here's what we're doing. Here's how we're doing it. Here's my role in it. And that way, you have a guiding star, something to come back to every single time. And everyone's on the same page. They can make good decisions together. As the leader, you have to guide them into making those joint decisions together. And it's just really important about letting them come to those decisions and making them together instead of telling them what the decisions are. This is where I see a lot of leaders get in the way of progress, saying, here's what we're doing. Instead, it's okay, let's figure out the mission for this project. We are going to sell a new product. This is how we're going to make it. But you have the people on the team build that whole mission statement. Then they deconstruct it a little bit and look at it again, go, that doesn't sound quite right. What would you say? And that's where the joint decision making starts to come in. And once they start learning to make joint decision making, you start to see people come together and trust each other more instead of being adversarial and off in their own corners and not communicating.
It imbues those individuals and the teams with a sense of purpose within each project and each thing that they're doing.
It does, a sense of purpose. And I think in an individualistic society, we forget about that there are others that can have input, and we're in divisive times. If leaders are listening to this, this is a good way to get teams functioning well together and to get off of very individualistic platforms, basically, and start making decisions together with others. This is a very important people skill, life skill.
That's a strong point. And for anybody listening, that'd be my challenge for this video, is to do exactly that. And Megan, perhaps you can run through that one more time again for them. Make a vision statement or mission statement for yourself right now. Maybe focus on one thing you want to accomplish, one thing you want to do. Maybe it's even improve your workplace culture, and reach out to Megan. Maybe that's your first mission statement. But so it's who we are, what we're doing, and how we're doing it.
And I even do this with families. I do it with small companies, with big corporations, governments, my teams. It can be one simple little project, but it doesn't matter what it is, even for yourself. Here's what we're doing, here's how we're going to do it, and here's my role in it. It just keeps things tight.
It becomes your North Star.
It does. And if you have someone with a high conflict personality, which is obviously what I talk about most of the time, you'll see that those who cannot participate in that way become very obvious. And then it's a matter of an organization deciding, do we keep this individual? Do we find another place for them? Which is what happens a lot. They get shifted around a lot because they're so disruptive and take so much time. Or do we let them go? So there are some in the field who advocate that you can't keep people like this around in an organization. I like to give people a chance to change before you make a decision like that. And so we have a coaching method called New Ways for Work that helps people have the 4 skills that we talked about, right? So there's the 4 key characteristics: all or nothing thinking. What do they need to learn? Flexible thinking. So we teach them that. They have unmanaged emotions. We teach them how to manage their emotions. They have extreme behaviors. Teach them how to have moderate behaviors. They blame. We teach them to take responsibility. Now, if they can't do those things, it's very obvious you don't want these folks in your company because it's risk, right? They're probably either going to get your company sued, or they're going to be the ones that sue you when things don't go right.
So where's the hope for those high conflict people? Of course, the coaching. That's a strong point. But what, and I touched on this a little bit or asked this question, is just, is there something that's, hey, when we found the best results when they had a clear sense of purpose, and what is it that someone could really go from one level to having a really great positive mentality?
They're probably just have some traits of the high conflict personality and not the full blown. The person with the full blown high conflict personality, they're just not going to succeed. Those with the traits, and they get some of this coaching and get some empathy. Like when I coach, I give quite a bit of empathy and I normalize things a lot, like maybe something terrible happened in childhood. They had some loss or some trauma. I give them empathy for that and say, look, there's a lot of people that have gone through this. You're not the only one. There's no shame that should be tied to it. And this is what I'm finding a lot with particularly men that I coach in leadership positions is there's just something that happened a long time ago that's driving them to be control freaks, that's driving them to do whatever they're doing that aren't working for them. And when they can get that switched around a little bit and work on that a bit, it really opens them up into being very strong leaders. Now, they aren't high conflict, they don't have a high conflict personality, but there's just some things that got in the way. And a little bit of coaching can go a long way on that. But someone with the true high conflict personality, it's pretty hardwired. And you've got some that really need to dominate. And of course, they're going to find their way to the top of the company or to the chairman of the board role, right? Because they're driven by this operating system that says I need to dominate, I need to be superior. And then they get in there and they can cause a lot of havoc at some point, probably 6 months to a year in.
For contextualization for everyone, are there specific, very well-known personalities that you would identify as a high conflict person?
I read a lot about Elon and I follow his Twitter because I find him really fascinating. And I would not consider him to have a high conflict personality. I think he's admitted he's a little bit on the spectrum and his behaviors, but I don't hear the blame. I'm always listening for the blame. Some of the things he does are extreme, but they're not extreme negative behaviors in terms of relating to other people and things. My business partner and co-founder, Bill Eddy, wrote an article about Steve Jobs several years ago, whether he was high conflict or not, because I think there were some issues of yelling and things like that. And I think he came somewhere out in the middle. It's been a few years since I read that article. But I look at others like Elizabeth Holmes from the Theranos debacle. And I think she's currently awaiting sentencing right now. You look at those behaviors, there was a lot of blame. There were extreme behaviors of lying to shareholders, lying to the regulators, things like that. That's on a really big scale. But we see this happen in small companies too. I've seen someone 80 plus years old that nearly took down $100 million revenue a year company because she got angry. Her anger was an unmanaged emotion, where someone else would stop themselves before sabotaging this whole company. These folks don't.
Are there, and you mentioned this, so if it's a full-blown spectrum, it's pretty hard, right? The full floor. But to go back to unmanaged emotion specifically, and more general question is, are there, let's say, unmanaged emotion, is that one easier to work through?
It takes some pretty hardcore therapy. There's dialectical behavior therapy that works with people with one type of personality disorder, and that's borderline personality. We apply some of those principles to working with the other types as well. But you get someone with an antisocial personality, they have a drive to dominate, and you just need to set a lot of limits with them. There have to be a lot of consequences because they're going to have unmanaged emotions, and there's really not much you can do about it except set a limit and say, not acceptable, not going to happen. Here's what happens if you do it again. And then that consequence has to be carried through. It's a little bit tricky and complex, but I want to give an example here. You'd asked about any biggies in the news, and I guess to give people kind of a very recent example is the Oscars, the slap that was heard around the world, right, with Will Smith and Chris Rock. Now, we saw Chris Rock make a joke about Will Smith's wife. Will gets up, marches on stage, and slaps him. Okay, so let's go back to our 4 key characteristics. Was there unmanaged emotions? Yeah. And extreme behavior? Yeah. Would 90% of other people ever do that thing? No. Was there blame? Obviously, he's blaming Chris for Jada's upset, right? And is it all or nothing? Yeah, it was pretty all or nothing. So it ticked all 4 boxes. Now, do we know if that means he is a high conflict personality? No, it doesn't, because you need to see a pattern of this. But really, 90% of other people would never do this thing that he did. Now let's go one step forward. He turns around, goes back to his seat. Chris Rock makes a couple of jokes, right? And what it elicits is Will to yell very loudly, "Get my wife's name out of your bleeping mouth." And then after I think Chris said something else, and Will repeated that same statement. And then Chris looked right at him and gave an ear statement. He said, "Okay, man, I'll stop." That's an ear statement. And that stopped Will right there. Is he high conflict? I don't know. But any upset person can be calmed with an ear statement. So that's just an example I thought might resonate.
Yeah, that's a great example. Definitely something a lot of people are familiar with. Where can we go to learn more about ear statements in particular, if they are so powerful?
We have a website, highconflictinstitute.com, and we've written a lot of books and we have courses. One of them, and I haven't even brought this up, is our conflict influencer certification course. And I've started using the word conflict influencer because conflict management is boring, isn't it? I think influencing conflict is what we can do, and it feels like something we can grasp and something we can do. So using BIF influences the other person. You're not going to solve their problems. You're not going to cure them or turn their personality around. You're going to influence what happens next. And if you keep doing that, it works really well. So anyway, all of our books are online and anywhere books are sold, and our website, highconflictinstitute.com.
Now, back to that piece about managing on the state level. So when we look at a societal level, what are the things we can do to support just better workplace cultures, better mannerisms, everything like that?
I really think, particularly in this period of time where so many people are working from home now, it's fantastic. I've been doing it for 15 years. However, there are some missing pieces there, and the main missing piece is connection. And as I work with doctors, hospitals, teachers, managers, supervisors, CEOs, anyone in any organization, what I'm hearing is a lack of connection. People are busy. Even if they're in person, they're too busy to want to take that minute to connect with someone else. And it's amazing when someone takes those few seconds or maybe a minute or two to say, "Hey, I like your shoes. Those are pretty cool. I haven't seen you wear those before." Or if it's virtual, you say, "Oh, I really like your new poster about Manuka on the wall. Tell me about that." It's connection that's missing. A lot of kids aren't getting the connection at home because parents are working, whatever the case may be. But in the workplace, I really believe whether you're virtual or in person, as a leader, spend more time connecting with others. Get your employees connecting. I just took our team to San Diego for our first ever team retreat. And most of us hadn't met each other. We have people from Australia, from all over the US. And it was magical to connect. And it builds relationships that I think we really need in the workplace. And then if you have those those kind of policies baked in, or just role model using EAR and using BIF, then you have a calmer, less stressful workplace, which is really important right now and will definitely help your workers focus on the task at hand and additive.
And you're absolutely right about that, about the sense of safety, security, having your needs met and by the team members around you, and just your own happiness being highly influential on workplace productivity. Because if you're having some conversation you had with one of your coworkers who was not nice, going on in your head, or you're worried about what they're thinking, those things really influence your happiness in general. So definitely something that needs to be addressed. And looking forward and staying on the societal level, many are saying we're going to go into a recession. I don't believe in recessions personally. Just something we can talk about another time. In essence, more of a mindset thing on that one.
Yeah.
That I would love to share. But what about the next 2 years that people are looking forward? They might be concerned. Talk about that sense of security, that safety. Some people are like, "Hey, what about this bill? What about this? What if I did lose my job?" Things like that are going to influence these outcomes.
Yeah, I think the next couple of years could be tough, but at the end of the day, it works. And I survived the pandemic. I survived the lockdowns. I did this, so I can do that. And people get very serious about things. And mortgages are serious, and a lot of this can be very worrying. But I think you just have to have the mindset, like you've already talked about. You've got to have a mindset of strength. Like, we can get through this. And you really have to get perspective on where we are in our lives. We live here in the US in a country of plenty and a lot of opportunity. And just last night, I was out to dinner with a friend who was very complaining about this horrible trip she'd had out of the country. And it was just a nightmare. It was because the trains weren't running, like, big deal. Last week, I had dinner with two girls from Afghanistan who were airlifted out of Kabul, and they will never see their mother again. They will never be back in the country again. They had a Taliban member shooting at their feet. It's all perspective. And if things are tough in the next couple of years, and there may be some foreclosures, there may be some job losses, there may be a recession, whatever. I think if you think of it in big picture and get that perspective of other people in the world, and also the big picture of these things happen, things come in cycles, and you just predict it and expect it. You hunker down and you get through it. That's what I do.
Building and
Resilience.
yeah, choosing not to participate. That's my one comment on that is the recession piece. Without
Yeah,
explanation, choose not to participate.
I love it. You get choices in how you think about things, right? You can sit and perseverate over this is going so poorly and I'm going to lose my house or I'm going to lose my job. Or just go live your life and get through it. Get through the tough times instead of hunkering under your turtle shell.
And for anyone watching this, when you said that statement, the positive, empowering statement, it was, we can really do this. My mind and my subconscious response is immediately to smile. So it does work. It
It
really does
does.
work.
It's all in your mind. I can sit and perseverate and get all down about different things, but and I do once in a while. I'm human, but overall, we have so much power, and I've seen it like these Afghani girls who have big smiles on their faces and they're making the best of their new life in the US in their early 20s and starting completely over. And I think, wow, I've got to quit whining about my life and I get to do really great things. And I think we just have to keep that perspective.
Amen to that perspective. Absolutely. What is the common moment of awareness that most of your to-be clients come to realize in their business that they need to work with you?
Uh, when they feel stuck and or they're being sued or a complaint is being filed against a professional license. Typically, it's when, like, we can handle small conflicts, but when it's high conflict, people just get completely stuck and they have no idea what to do and how to climb out of the hole. I'll find some of the most brilliant mathematicians, CEOs, scientists in the world who don't know what to do with this. It's just we're not taught what to do with people who act the exact opposite of how everyone else acts and behaves. And they cause so much internal distress within with it. So I think organizations feel really frustrated by just not knowing what to do and they're ready to fire people. And when we work with them for a little bit of time, I just recently had a company come back and say, we were ready to fire this guy. And then you worked with him a little bit and now he's like a pleasure to work with. And it just took one little breakthrough. And it's just called being human. I'm very human. I'm no farm girl from Nebraska. We're just real. It's just got to be real with people and not shame and not blame and just let's have a chance to succeed here.
And furthermore, what are some regular daily practices that are most supportive for your life and actualizing your goals that people can practice?
I would say it just keeps coming back to empathy. I practice that a lot, and I can get a little bit lost in and get away from it sometimes working when my team's not with me. I get so super focused on the work, and I have to remind myself daily practice, use empathy, forgive a little bit, extend some grace, right? And then remembering to disrupt your own defaults, right? Because you're busy. We're in our workday, and it's like get this email and go, kind of get ticked off about it and right back. And then it blows up and you get some blowback on it. You get that email again that takes more time and causes more disruption. And somebody's even more upset. So it takes a fair amount, for me, a fair amount of discipline to say, okay, I'm going to biff this email before I send it. Even if I feel like I want to send it because I'm a little annoyed with this person, it just never works to do that. So those are my daily practices. I also take a nap every single day.
Really?
I just take a nap when I get tired, and I hope I block my calendar in the afternoon for the around the time that I'm usually sleepy. And I find that it helps me a lot get through the rest of my day and be really fresh minded. I think everybody should take a nap.
I love that one. Do you ever get insights as well? This is something I've heard about people who are highly successful. If you're really focused on something and then you go take a nap, you can sometimes get an insight, think clearer. Obviously, your mood comes up. So yeah, everyone should take a nap. Highly recommend that one as well. You ever find you get those insights though?
Absolutely. Just stepping away, going away. And sometimes it's overnight and wake up the next day if I am working really hard on a problem. And in fact, this morning I was doing that. I'm trying to change up the way I do this one particular training. It's something I wanted to change for years. I'm like, okay, this is the time I'm going to do it. And I got stuck and I was just really frustrated. It's like, I should be able to do this. I've done it 1,000 times. Now I can't deconstruct it and construct it in a different way. So I went and watched an episode of something new on Netflix. It's Saturday today, so I'm good doing that. And then the ideas start to flow in. And I would recommend the same actually when you're working with someone really challenging. Take that space, take that step away, because then you'll get some time for new ideas to flow in.
Awesome. So a couple last questions here. How do you think about achievement in your life? What are some of maybe the achievements that are you're most proud of, and how do you really continue to look forward and think about achievement?
For me, family, as a mother of adult children, having great relationships with 100% of my children is my greatest achievement in life. Not that they graduated college, that's all great stuff, but to have good relationships with them continuously is huge to me. And a good marital relationship, I'm grateful for those things. But in the work world, I never let anything stop me. I didn't think I was particularly skilled or smart or anything. In fact, I used to think I was pretty dumb. And a therapist told me, "What do you do for a living?" Oh, I train judges and lawyers. Oh, are you a judge or a lawyer? No. You think you might have some brains? Anyway, I was never satisfied with leaving things as they are. Like, let's just do better. Let's always do better. And so I kept driving forward and started this company, started the publishing company, and it was basically to help people. So I guess that ties back to passion, right? What drives me? What is that passion? And it's helping people. When I'm coaching someone and I see a breakthrough, I could be training 1,000 people at a big conference in, London or something, and I would not get the satisfaction that I do with helping one person. But all of that passion going into I live in a country of opportunity, and you can do anything you want here. You can build your company, even if you don't know what you're doing. I think most people can relate to that. We have a lot of bumps along the road, but you just keep driving forward. And if you're doing something that helps people and you're really passionate about and helps companies, at the end of the day, that's the achievement.
So would you say your grand vision for the world as well? And even one thing to connect back to earlier, your core mission right now, if you were to state it in one or two sentences and then attach that to the vision that you're going for, let's say long term for everybody and for this country and this world.
I would like for there to be less division, and it's just really tough. Like it's just a tough road to hoe with media and everything that's happening. When we started HCI 15 years ago, we really wanted to move the needle forward in terms of conflict. And you look back now, and there are areas we have moved the needle forward. And one of those, I believe, is in family law, divorce and child custody cases, training the professionals how to deal with people in a different way, like mediations and things. But on a grander scale, to be able to for young people to learn how to regulate their emotions and to have these 4 key skills in life: the managed emotions, moderate behaviors, taking responsibility, and flexible thinking. If everyone had those key skills, we would have a different planet, right? If they taught every kid those skills in school, we would have a workforce in 15 or 20 years that is really ready to work and can focus on their work. Even if they have a less than stellar family life, they can still learn these things in school or other places. As far as that would be my vision, is getting people skilled up in that way. People can learn all these skills right now and do better. I want people to do better. I think we give people too much slack in a way, and I think they can. I think we should hold people to a little higher accountability without being so-called Karen and telling people what to do, but to really encourage each other to do better. I hope that answers your question. I probably rambled a bit.
100%. And I believe you and your mission and your vision, absolutely. And so what is your call to action for businesses and entrepreneurs seeking to work with you and your team?
If you have an issue, if you want to be more competitive, you have to take care of number one, who you hire. You have to be cautious about that. I was supposed to write a book called Hiring Radar, but it's not done yet. But we do consult on that. Little things that will tip you off to someone that's going to be very damaging to your company or spend a lot of time in the HR office. From there to if you have someone like this already in your organization, you really need to have an understanding of how to handle them and what to do differently. So that can be after the problem's already identified, but then also building a workplace culture. If you really want a workplace culture where you do influence conflict and not just avoid it or just manage it, but actually influence it, that's a big deal. That there is what can take you to a next level, in my opinion.
100%. So if you want to learn more about yourself, your mindset, your business, and how you can build a powerfully supportive and successful culture, go engage with Megan and her team. I'll have a link in the description. Megan, thank you very much for enlightening us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's really fun to just talk about myself.
100%. You're welcome. See you on the next episode of Titans Up Today.
Hey everyone, thank you for watching this episode of Titans Up Today. What did you learn from it? Make sure to drop a comment below with your most valuable insight so that other people can engage in the conversation around what this speaker brought to the table. And then on another front, make sure to subscribe so that every time we drop a new episode, you will be notified. And that way you can keep fueling your dreams and your brain with fresh insights, which can help you along your journey and along your path to your goals. So thank you so much again, and I look forward to seeing you in the next interview.